Episode 7 of the Juice Box Junkies podcast. Marty Coleman in Kyle, Texas today. With me is Joe Fernandez in Chicago, Brian Dunleavy in Virginia. Whereabouts in Virginia are you, Brian?
I'm in the cold area known as Fredericksburg right now, where we decided to enjoy some spring weather this past weekend and then go back down to the 40s and 30s.
That's much like Austin. It's not quite. It's in the 40s this morning, and now it's 70. And I'm sitting here 75, I think, and I'm sitting here in
Oh,
shorts. So I'm used to that, and I'm sure Joe's might have a foot of snow.
Yeah, it was 60 degrees on Saturday. Then it snowed overnight Sunday at about 3 inches, and now it's back to being in the 40-degree range. So it's typical Chicago spring.
No
geez.
doubt. No, Chicago spring, 40 degrees. Yeah, that reminds me of spring. Hey, guys, I don't know if you've heard, but there's a lockout in Major League Baseball. And for the last 6 weeks, we have been talking about the competitive balance tax and on and on and on. That seems like most of what they've been talking about. And then 15 minutes ago, I get an update from a kid, but also got one on ESPN that now they're trying to hammer out the international draft. Now, go figure. MLB is for it, and the Players Association is against it. There wasn't much details in the article I saw, but as we were talking as a group before we hit record, they seem to be getting close on a lot of things, but not coming to a resolution, a final answer resolution on anything. Joe, what's your take about where they're at and any idea in your mind? Do you have any thoughts of when this is going to be solved? My kid just told me, don't get excited. So
Yeah.
I go with that right now.
I mean, if I'm the owners, I would capitulate on – I don't know, but it's easy for me to say because it's not my money. But I would capitulate on the money stuff if the players are willing to yield on, like, rule changes, playoff teams, all that. Because I saw that potentially they were going to go to 14 teams, which would be – that's more money for TV. That's more money for attendance. So if the players are willing to do these things that would add revenue, then why not then give in on some of the financial stuff? I mean, I don't know. I don't know which owners it is that would be against raising that salary cap. I'd imagine it's not the ones who go towards the line, but more like the Pirates, the Guardians, the Rays are the ones who are like, well, no, that makes it even less competitive for us. I'm not sure because that tax money does go to those lower teams, if I'm not mistaken, on how it works. So yeah, it just seems strange to me. The owners wouldn't be like, look, we'll capitulate on the money if you then give us things that'll bring in revenue with either rule changes, with playoff format, all that. But, I'm still on the players' side, especially with the whole Chris Bryant waiting a day after his service time stuff, like manipulating the system like that. I can see why the players are frustrated and why if you don't get your first chance at free agency till you're 27, I get why players want 10-year contracts because it's kind of their only time to cash in because no one wants a 33 or 34-year-old. So, there's got to be some way to make it a little more balanced as opposed to just that mega deal for the superstars.
I don't know if I can remember all 4 teams, but the Angels were there because my kid had texted me about every owner and why he was a cheapskate. When it was the Angels and the Pirates are the 2 that I remember, but there were only 4 teams against it, as I recall, or at least four owners that voted against it. And they theoretically they need 75% to pass it, so they could pass it if they wanted to. With 4 no votes, but who knows if they actually voted, other owners may vote no too. But there's 4 that are known to be against it. I think the Diamondbacks, Angels, and Pirates are 3 of them, and I don't remember the 4th.
The Angels surprises me just because they spend money like crazy, but maybe they're tired of doing that.
Yeah, they're tired of paying Albert Pujols $25 million a year to bat 209 or whatever it is.
Their own personal Bobby Bonilla.
Brian, what's your take on where we're at in the lockout negotiations?
Yeah, I mean, I think y'all are spot on that. As we mentioned before, we came on here. There's a lot of things they're close on, and I don't understand. We brought this up last week. I don't understand why they don't just say, "Hey, look, progress. We agreed on this part and on this part." I feel like right now they could easily sit down at the table and hammer out the league minimum salary and even the competitive balance tax that they're very close on 8 million off. I mean, that doesn't seem like much at all. They're 25,000 off on the minimum salary, which is not much compared to how much it was off at the beginning. Those sort of things. I think they should, if they want to stay in the positive light, especially for fans, and have some hope and some maybe positive momentum, maybe that they should actually agree to some things and put it out there that we've solved these parts. But I know how negotiators are and how this is going to go. They want all agreed to or nothing. They don't want to show any weakness, per se on the either the owners or the players side. They just want to stick to their guns. But back to what you were saying. I mean, the playoffs part. They've agreed on a 12 playoffs. Is from what I'm reading.
Right.
So that is one thing that they've actually done. I know the owners wanted 14 total, and the players were fine with 12, and that's more than we have now. So I don't see, that sounds like a good thing. And as you guys are mentioning, and I'm looking in the article here from CBS Sports, it looks like the Reds, Tigers, Diamondbacks, and Angels are the four that voted against the $220 million competitive balance tax proposal that they had. So, but they don't need they don't need every single person. They can ratify it with 23 out of the 30. So they're good to go on that. So, like I said, again, agree on stuff, put it out there, say there's progress, give people hope, give them a light at the end of the tunnel. I know on Tuesday night they had some. It's very strange. They agree on these things. They have these long conferences, and then before that proposal on Tuesday night, they said, "Here's the deadline, and players are going to start losing their salary if we don't get to the agreement by Tuesday night at midnight." Well, that wasn't going to happen. I mean, there's no way that they were going to agree on everything at that point. So, the response to that from the players and the players' union was, "Well, we're going to get paid our full salary for the whole season." Whether you say that we're going to lose it or not, part of the negotiation is that we get paid for a full season, regardless of how many games there are, which, I can understand that to a point. But if we're talking about a half season, and there, I'm an owner, I'm like, there's no way I'm paying you a whole season for 80 games. And maybe you play, the players usually take off 1 or 2 games a week or so, depending on the time of the year. What are you going to play 60 games for the season and get paid the full amount? I don't think so. I mean, that's kind of crazy to think about. But back to what you're saying with the international draft part, I think that is so strange that came up at this point, and I don't understand it. I don't get it. The players want international players to be able to pick whatever team they want to be a part of, as opposed to having them included in a draft where they're kind of locked up, which is the way that everybody else operates in the world. Any other major sport, you get drafted. In NBA, they draft players. The Spurs are notorious for this, Marty. You know that. That they draft players from Spain that are going to play with Spain on their national team for 5 years, so that they get them in 6 or 7 or 8, in the hopes that they can get them back for the talent that they have left and remaining. So I really don't understand how that's such a non-starter. The players say absolutely not. They should be able to pick, and the owners are like, no, we should be able to draft them just like we draft high schoolers and college players.
Yep. I don't get it either. There wasn't much detail in the article I read right before we went live. But here's how it's going for me. I'm finally understanding the competitive balance tax and why it's such a big deal. And then they change topics, right? Because and also the amount of games thing. Didn't we hear a week, 10 days ago now that there's no way? They already canceled the first 2 series of the season, and we're still. Then Tuesday was the deadline for 162 games. That stretched into today, and I still haven't heard anything today about 162 games being out of reach. And the owners are starting to look a little bit like they're crying wolf. But anyway, back to the competitive balance tax, what I understood about it is the players believe it's being used as basically a salary cap. And last year, only 2 teams went over, and that's the players' proof, right? And I think one of them was the
Yep.
Dodgers, and they were just over by a little bit. Now the Yankees, of course, blew it out of the water. But the
Like always.
point is, yeah, the other 28 teams are using it basically as a salary cap. Um, and the owners don't believe that the rate of growth should be the same as revenues grows. They don't think they should be tied together. The players believe they should be tied together. So I don't know. I'm just starting to wrap my arms around that, and here we are moving on to the international the international draft. And I don't know. I kind of want to say, wake me up when they've reached an agreement, because as you were saying, Brian, they don't want to give in on any one topic, because then they lose leverage, right? They lose that leverage. Oh no, you already agreed to whatever, the competitive balance tax, because they don't seem far away. $30 million apart. When I looked at it last, that sounds like a lot to the three of us. But when you're talking about a multi-billion-dollar industry, that's not much at all. That's tiny. That's a tiny bit. So um, I'm a little bit. I know this is our 7th straight week of talking about it. I guess we're going to talk about it to some extent every week. But man, I just wish they'd agree to it. And the whole thing is, this didn't have to happen, as we talked about last week. The owners could have just said, we're playing under last year's rules and we'll figure this out in the off season, and we won't wait until 3 days before
Yeah.
before to start sharing our different ideas. So I
Well,
don't know.
and with the balance tax too. I mean, that when they come back and say, "Oh, that's their salary capping us," but again, that on the flip side, that looks like the players whining, saying we're not big enough millionaires. We need to
Right.
be, we need to sign $500 million contracts instead of $350 million contracts. I mean, come on. I mean, until we really have some more, I don't know, reasonable discussions on that front, I think that's a non-starter. I think that's why they moved on.
Yeah, no doubt. All right, let's talk about something a little bit more fun, a little less number driven, which is weird for me to say, but there's some rule changes proposed, and part of the negotiation is MLB being allowed to change rules without the players' consent. But the 3 rule changes I wanted to talk about, to whatever extent you guys do: larger bases, which I found interesting. And I'm kind of picturing like a clown show out there, right? These huge bases that guys are running to. Uh, Limits on the shift, which there are going to be some stories, or already is, on climbing Tal's Hill about how that would affect Astros players. And we had some data on the site that fascinated me earlier. I think it was yesterday, which really was interesting to me. And a pitch clock, 14 seconds with no one on base, and 19 seconds with runners on base. Joe, start out whichever one of those you want to talk about, and let's go for it.
2 of the 3 I'm in favor of. If I'm not mistaken, the bigger bases are to increase the attempted steals.
Yeah.
That it made a higher percentage rate, which is why I think analytically driven people will then be like, well, if their stolen base rate can get up to 90%, then it is worth risking the out if 33% of the time they score. I think that's how they're looking at it, where the reason steals went down is because the risk of the out at 75% steal rate isn't worth the extra base that he may or may not score on. But if you get someone who has like maybe a 90% steal rate, now 9 out of 10 times they're safe, 3 out of 10 times they score. As a result, the out is worth. So I'm in favor of the larger bases, because I also miss stolen bases, like the Vince Coleman, Ricky Henderson types who could go for 100. And that's not even, I don't even know last time someone even crack 60 last year? Like, I mean,
I think 55 was the highest, I think, if I remember correctly.
So it's real strange to see that part gone. It's really, hit and runs, all that stuff's gone now. So I think that I'm very in favor of, and it won't change the game except for the better. Same with if you limit the shifts. I think that'd be, if you get like the way they limited mound visits, if you limit it to 5, you know how people like to play along with the manager, which is kind of why people are against the designated hitter, because it's like, well, now you're taking the strategy out. Do I pull my pitcher if we're down a run, but he's pitching well in the 6th? So it would reintroduce strategy a little bit in terms of, if you only get 5 shifts, do you use them strictly on one batter like Jordan Alvarez, and that way take away that lefty pull power? Or do you use them situationally, like, oh, well, now there's a runner on first, you want to maybe make him try and go the other way and take away any chance at extra bases or whatever, that could actually help with that game that people like to play when they're watching baseball, is playing along with the manager, the batters of the, what are they going to throw here, a 2-1 count. So I think that kind of factors into what people like about baseball, is being the manager and guessing and trying to make decisions. So those two I'm in favor of. The pitch clock I'm not, for the very reason of the thing I like about baseball is it's the only sport without a clock, besides golf, obviously. But even then, every single other sport, you are physically not capable of catching up to someone at a certain point. Basketball or football, if you're down 20 points with 10 seconds, you can't come back. Soccer, you're down 3 goals with 20 seconds, you physically can't come back. Baseball, even if you're down 100-0, 2 outs, nobody on, technically, even if it's a 1,000,000,000 to 1 shot, there is still a chance. There's something I find appealing about baseball, that even last year, the Astros, when we were playing the Mariners, what were we up 7-0 against them? And then they came back.
I remember that game.
Yeah, and then I remember it too, because then the next day they traded Kendall Graveman to us for some reason. I've never seen a bigger shot in the foot. I can't, the momentum shift of that. And I think they were only 5 games behind us in the division. So that was by far weird. I feel bad for Mariners fans still for that. But but anyhow, that's what I like about baseball, is the fact that there is no time. So the pitch clock I'm worried about too, just because what is the penalty that it's just a ball for the pitcher if he doesn't toss it in?
I'm not sure.
Yeah, I don't know the specifics on the penalty. I think that's right though.
Because if it's a ball, can you imagine a game being decided on that, full count, bases loaded, and the pitcher? I mean, it just seems like that would really, really make for a terrible way for a ball game to end, or a terrible way for the momentum to shift. Someone gets walked on a 3-1 count. And also, the only thing I could think is that it also would then increase steals tremendously if a pitcher's at the 16-second mark and the runner's like, well, I'm going, because he's got to get the ball home, or his throw, they can really time up a pitcher now if it gets to that 16-second mark. So I don't know. There's something about the clock that just really, I think, throws off the game a bit. It could make it a little sloppier. A pitcher tries to rush a throw in, gives up a home run. I mean, it's just,
wait till somebody gets hurt. Somebody hurts their arm because they're trying to throw unnaturally because the clock's running out in a tight situation, right? Or as you said, it decides a game. The thing I pointed out in an article yesterday on Climbing Hill was, what about the batters? Every batter steps out on every pitch of every game, right? The pitcher oftentimes is standing on the mound ready. Sometimes he's not. I get that. So maybe I exaggerate a little bit, but the batter steps out on every pitch. It's so obvious that last year somebody didn't, and I don't remember who it was, but somebody didn't. And I was like, oh my God, he stayed in the batter's box, because it's so unusual, right? They're blaming the pitchers for this, and I kind of get it, because the play can't start without the pitcher on the mound. But the play also can't start, or I've rarely, if ever, seen it start without the batter in the batter's box. Those are the guys. Think about Kyle Tucker rubbing his hands together after every pitch. Thinking about the guys taking the practice swings or straightening their jersey or helmet or whatever. I think it's more on the batter than the pitcher. Now, maybe they've thought all this out. I don't know about Major League Baseball. And maybe they've thought it out, and, if the batter's not in the box and the pitcher's ready to go, so what? Throw the pitch. Or is the batter still going to be able to put his hand up and tell the umpire he's not ready? How's all that going to work? I've seen it in the minor leagues for years, but I just, it's kind of a novelty. You see it over there on the side, and I don't think I've ever seen anybody called for any delay when that clock runs out. I don't know. I never noticed it. At least I've never noticed it in the minors. I did also mention this on our Slack channel. In college baseball the last weekend, I saw 3 separate times where the pitcher was called for a ball for coming set and then stepping off the mound. Here's the weird thing. I think that's supposed to speed the game up. In other words, he's not supposed to come set, step off, start the whole routine over. But it ended up slowing the game down because everybody's going, what the hell? You're right.
Yeah.
What is this? And they have to explain it. Even the coaches and players. I'm not, not just the people watching, but the coaches and the players wasn't sure what's going on. I agree with you on the basis, and the pitch clock, I want to see how it works in practice. Mm-hmm. If it speeds the game up, great. But I also think some responsibility needs to be put on the batters to stay in the batter's box and be ready if the pitcher has to be ready. It sounds obvious, but
Yeah.
the only thing I've seen is talking about pitchers and not batters. And with that, I'm going to throw it to an old batter, Brian Dunleavy. What's your take on these rule changes?
Well, so Marty, I get what you're saying. I think there is a rule in place for batters that they have to get in the box within a certain time period, and that otherwise the umpire has to tell them to get in, or once they instruct them to get in, they have to get in essentially before the pitcher's ready on the mound. And when I was playing back in college, we had a rule that we had to keep 1 foot in the box at all times. Otherwise, we couldn't. Otherwise we're a delay of game, and then there's things that happen from there. So I understand that if you're doing that to the batters, and I just kind of quickly Googled it, and it looks like they have 10 seconds in between pitches for them to get in the box and get everything going. And if the umpire enforces it, which is always the case. And that was my question with the pitch thing. Who's enforcing it? Is it the umpire, the home plate umpire that's enforcing it? And if that's the case, they're probably going to enforce it just as much as they're enforcing the batters box rule. And so I don't see that happening unless we go to the robots, which I think on one hand it's a good thing, but I think that's an awful thing as well. If you go to these kind of senseless robots, kind of calling the game. But anyways, with that, I like I actually like the pitch clock rule, as long as they don't hammer them on it and follow it like, oh, you were about to start the windup and it's 19 seconds, so it's forget about it. It's a ball. If they do stuff like that, then I'm totally against it. But if they're just trying to say, hey, be on the mound, get your pitch, get set, and as long as you're set by the 19 seconds, you're good. You don't have to necessarily rush your, like you're always saying, rush your delivery to home, hurt yourself, or do other things. It's more of you have to be in that set position where you only have one option. It's either send the ball home or throw it over to first or second base, to try and pick off the guy. So I'm in favor of that. I like the, as long as it's not crazy,
Right.
So I hope it's not crazy. If it ends up being like the NFL where they're kind of crazy on everything like that, and they're all specific on everything, then I'm totally against it, and they should get rid of it. But if it's just up to the umpire at home plate to enforce, I think that could be a good thing. There's almost, and the funny part about that is too, though, there's almost the opposite that happens too, where they have the quick pitch pitchers that they're set and ready to go, and the batter gets in the box, and then they're like want to crank it in there before you can even get your bat on your shoulder, So it's like, it all depends. So I like the idea behind it. I hope the enforcement's not crazy, and and that'll be fine. I don't think it'll really have a big impact. But again, that all depends on I don't know what the MLB is telling them to do for this pitch clock. I don't know if they're telling them to say, be hardcore and make sure that ball, I think, and I looked it up as a ball, they'll call a ball if they hit the limit, call that right away. That would be terrible. If they really went that forceful, they went more with a warning at the end of the inning saying, hey, you're slowing your pitches, make sure you're just getting it up. That I think that's not a bad thing. The shift limit thing, I think that I'm against that, only because if you're a professional hitter and you can't hit out the shift, then you're not a good hitter. Goodness gracious, if I'm up to bat as a lefty like Yordan Alvarez, and the third baseman's playing behind second base, and I can't shoot it down the line, well, what the heck? Should I really be in the major leagues? I don't know. Abuse this, in my mind, abuse the shift and make them play you straight up. Otherwise I don't think you have anything to complain about. But I do get the point behind that, that there are certain players, that are hurt by that and whatnot. I understand that part, but for me, being more of a hitter to all fields in my time, and seeing all the straight pull hitters that just want to hit home runs the whole time, then they're the ones that are always moving forward. I could care less. I think that's just a whiny kind of point. The larger basis thing, I think that'll be interesting. Like Joe says, although again, with all these things, is there going to be an asterisk next to it if the stolen base record's broken. I don't think anybody's breaking Henderson, but if they do, if that happens, is there going to be an asterisk, bigger bases, smaller base path kind of thing, or how's that going to go forward? I don't know, but I think the other aspect of that too, that I am in favor of, is saving the first baseman from getting run into. I think that was the other reasoning behind it, so that they had less collisions at first base, and they don't have many, but every so often it does happen, and it gives kind of a free path for the runner. I just remember, I think there was one or two instances, and one of them was Jason Varitek. This is way back, running to first base, and I think he was trying to avoid the tag, hits the base on the side of his foot, and his foot is facing upward.
Yeah, I think I remember that.
And totally shatters his ankle. And that, if we're trying to avoid stuff like that with the bigger base, that I don't see anything wrong with that. But I don't think any of those rules will have a huge impact on the game as a whole. I think the shift limits, that'll be it. So
there are guys that benefit from the shift too. It was amazing. Like I said, looking at that data we had on Climbing-Tal's Hill the other day, I had a thought about the shift. Initially, I was concerned, or I was against limiting it, simply because why should you be able to tell a manager, in this case, where to place his players as long as they're on the field of play? But then someone pointed out to me, you can in basketball, right? The offense can't be in the lane for 3 seconds. You're limiting where they can be for how long. In football, they have to line up on their side of the line of scrimmage, right? So they can't be anywhere on the field of play. So that made sense to me when it was explained that way. Any other thoughts, Joe?
I was going to say, I mean, it's because there's always been shifts in terms of like third baseman and first baseman playing in on a faster hitter who maybe bunts for a hit. There's double play depth. There's no doubles outfield. They shade in the outfield, But I think the reason for the shift is limiting the shift, it's strictly from an entertainment perspective, is that people would rather see that go down for a hit. And, so I think similar to the 3 seconds thing of, you don't want Bill Russell and Wilt Chamberlain clogging up the lane, and the game gets just a little bit muddier and there's not as many exciting plays. So if you take that defender out of the middle, more penetration, more dunks or layups, whatever. So if it's for the entertainment value, and I think it's limiting it helps also then add that kind of the strategy factor into it, as opposed to just banning it outright. Because then when you ban it, it kind of flirts with, well, like if, let's say they have to stay on the dirt, is also what I've heard, is that they can maybe move around but just have to stay on the dirt. Then if a third baseman's playing in on a hitter who's quick and someone's bunts for a hit, are they breaking the rules by playing infield in? That's a shift too. So it's kind of a weird, that gray area of like, well, these shifts have been around forever, so we're okay with playing infield in, but the second baseman being in right field's weird to us, so we're banning that one. But I think it's for entertainment value. I think it's for, guys, I mean, I will say, left-handed hitters, I get why they should be able to go the other way, but I think the reason they always pull is because, again, the analytics people say we'd rather have you hitting for power and have that out get taken away than going singles. Like, Yordan Alvarez could be a 400 hitter probably if he just went the other way or bunted down the line. But I think as a result, then the game would get a little bit uglier, and we want to see him hit those bombs and stuff. But then also, I think because right-handed pitchers, I mean, Brian, since you played, you'd know better than me, but like, since right-handed pitchers are oftentimes coming into lefties, it's much harder for them to try and go the other way when the sliders and cutters are coming in on their hands, and they kind of have no choice but to pull. Not that righties don't face lefties, but not as frequently, I guess. But yeah, I don't know.
Yeah. I mean that could be the case. Oftentimes, at least in the lower levels, before you get up to the big time, that you get pitched away constantly. That's you see 90% of your pitches are on the outer half. Mm-hmm. So whether it's a curveball or not, any of that stuff, usually you get put on the outer half. But when you get up to the big leagues, then they find your zone, obviously where you're weakest, and exploit that. So I think it depends, but I agree with you. I think that it's an entertainment value piece, 100%. I think they rather see, and this is, I think this has been the case since the the mid to late 90s, they'd rather see home runs versus a guy like Tony Gwynn hitting 350. They want to see 50 home runs.
Mhm.
Yeah, it's funny how many times last year or last several years I've gotten excited thinking a line drive that would have been, quote, over the second baseman's head was a routine ground out in the shift, right, from short right field. And that has worked for the Astros and against the Astros, as we know. All right, today our minor league player of the week is Hunter Brown. Uh, he is a fifth round draft pick out of Wayne State in 2018. He's a Michigan State, a native of the state of Michigan, and he modeled his game after Justin Verlander. Makes sense, growing up in Michigan while Justin Verlander was pitching for the Tigers. He is the third ranked overall prospect in the Astros system behind Corey Lee and Jeremy Pena, two guys we have previously profiled here. Listen to these numbers, fellas. 76 strikeouts and 49 and a third innings at Corpus Christi with a 4.20 ERA, and 55 strikeouts and 51 innings at Sugarland after his promotion, and he had a 3.88 ERA. Now, he sits in the mid 90s, and he has hit 99 before with riding action on his four-seam fastball. Biggest weapon remains his curveball, which he throws along with the slider and changeup, and obviously the fastball that we talked about. So this is your number one pitcher in the Astros organization now, not the aforementioned Forrest Whitley. Joe, I don't know if you had a chance to do any research on Mr. Brown, but what's your thoughts?
It's just kind of crazy how quickly he's become the number 3 prospect. I mean, we got him in 2019, and already he's moved past Forrest Whitley, which I know Whitley's had some setbacks. But man, to jump, I mean, he's leapfrogged so many people. But the Astros seem to be having better luck with people who weren't their top pitching prospect. If you're a top Astros pitching prospect, I kind of feel sorry for you at this point. Like Mark Appel, I'm trying to Francis Martes, like these guys, for whatever reason, the ones who are untouchable in trade packages, then suddenly are nowhere. Then Luis Garcia just jumps from single A to the majors, and he's just totally fine, So it's just kind of weird how the Astros pitching has worked out. But, Hunter Brown, a fifth round pick, already being the number 3 behind Pedro Leon and Corey Lee is really impressive. And are there plans for him? It looks like he started last season, 24 starts 24 games, 19 starts. So I'd heard that he had more the look of a reliever, but that he could, if he improves his repertoire, has the chance to be a starter. That they were looking at him as a closer more because he has like maybe 2 strong pitches, but that he's working on getting a better repertoire to maybe work his way into the rotation talk. So,
just me, but I would think if he's the top pitcher or the top pitching prospect for the Astros, that he would have more than 2 pitches, but I certainly could be wrong because I have not seen him pitch. I've just read about him. So, Brian, do you know anything about Mr. Brown?
No, I just doing a quick scan on his stats and things. I haven't been able to research him too much in depth, but just looking at the numbers wise, it looks like he could be in the middle. He could be. They could be trying him out as both, kind of like Christian Javier-esque, which would be a sad, unfortunate position for him if he ended up in the same kind of boat.
No.
But looking at and these numbers could be wrong too. But I'm looking at Baseball Reference and his stats, and from Wayne State, he had an 85 innings pitched for the season. That doesn't seem like a ton. I feel like he'd have a lot more if he was either going deep into the game as a starter or was a starting pitcher. But Sugarland, like you said, he has 51 innings pitched total, and 11 games, 8 started. So mostly a starter. But again, my question goes to, as we talked about last podcast, where does he fit? There's no, unless he's the next ace on the rotation. He's fighting off of 4 or 5 guys already that are behind McCullers and Verlander. That it might be a year or 2 out for him But at that case, does he beat out one of those young guys that we already have on there for the lower spots, or is he jumping all the way up to the top? I don't think with 2 pitches you're going to do that unless you're throwing like Verlander did, when he was younger in the upper 90s, 97, 98. He's in the mid 90s. I mean, he's close, but if they can work on his mechanics and maybe get him up a little higher, that could be the case.
Well, as we talked about last week and for several weeks, the rotation may look completely different next year. Verlander has an option, assuming he hits the 130 innings mark this year, that could find him somewhere else next year if he wants, if he so desires. Jake Odorizzi is quote signed for next year, but he can be bought out for $3.2 million, and hopefully Hunter Brown's in a better place in his career than Jake Odorizzi is. Who knows with the other younger guys? We talked last week about some sophomore slump type numbers this year that could put him in Hunter Brown into the rotation at least a few starts per year. Maybe that's how it works out, right? He's a fill-in starter this year, if not a reliever, and then works his way up, and next year becomes a starter as free agency happens, perhaps a trade. Who knows? We'll see. But you can never have too much pitching, as we found out last year and the year before with guys like Andre Scrub and on the mound and those type of players. So, but he's a number 3 prospect and the top pitching prospect in the Astros system. So there must be some good there. And if negotiations don't get any better, we'll have a lot of free time to watch minor league baseball. So we'll all be learned on these minor leaguers. I've already got the app on the phone. I'm just waiting for the season to start watching some minor league games. And the kid and I plan on doing some traveling this summer. We're within range of Round Rock, Sugarland, and there's a team in San Antonio I don't remember. So we've got some minor leagues around here that we can check out. And Corpus is about 3.5 hours for us, but it's a nice drive and a nice park there on the waterway. So it was a lot of fun, but man, it was hot in July in Corpus. And that's from somebody who's lived in Texas since 1988. It was hot in Corpus in July, very hot. Joe Fernandez, Brian Dunleavy, another episode in the books. Thank you guys so much. Everybody out there listening, please go read our stuff on climbingtaleshill.com. We enjoy it. I think, as I told Joe before we started recording, he's got like 97 articles up right now, just all himself. And I got one coming in the next couple of days. But fellas, thank you so much for your time, and we'll talk again next week.
All right. Sounds good. Thanks.